Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pump House's series of artist talks, where we sit down with current exhibiting artists to discuss their exhibitions, processes, and inspirations. Today, I am joined by Ingrid Restemayers and Jo Hendricks in their series of works Femme and Fauna, currently on display in our Cotter Gallery through April 13th, 2024. Femme and Fauna is a two-person exhibition composed of Ingrid Restemayers' mixed media collage, print and fiber works, and Jo Hendricks' figurative painted drawings. Fauna is comprised of organic, intricate etchings of animals, and Femme is comprised of drawn from life series of women's bodies shown in a fluid and expressive movements. So thank you so much for joining me today. I thought we could just start with each of you introducing yourselves and your artistic background and giving us that story of how you met and decided to bring your two bodies of work together.
Ingrid, I think you've got this nailed, so I'm going to let you talk.
Thank you, Jo-Ann. Thanks for the confidence. Hi, everyone. My name is Ingrid Restemayers. I'm a printmaker and fiber artist from Minneapolis, Minnesota, with my best accent on there, Minnesota. My work is, as Olivia said, mixed media. It's printmaking and fiber arts. I do etchings, dry point etchings that are artworks in their own right. And then when the editions are done, I go back and print them on handmade papers and collage and embroider over them. I've been doing this kind of work for, gosh, almost 30 years now, combining both mediums. And I first met Jo-Ann and saw her work, gosh, 1996-ish or something. It was 100 years ago when Jo-Ann was the executive director for the Northeast Minneapolis Arts Association, and I was volunteering. And she and I, we became friends very quickly. Our work ethics were the same. I loved her work. She loved mine. And we just got to be fast friends. And she and I, meeting under the guise of the logistics of being an artist, putting on shows, herding chickens, all those kinds of things. And, we carried on sort of advising each other, inspiring each other, helping each other out. She often helps me out in my studio during open studio times, and I like to show her work there as well. And we were talking about one day, we were talking about how to further our exhibition catalog and what would be good fit and all this kind of thing. And it dawned upon us that we had never had a show together. I had loved her work, she had loved mine, and we thought, well, we can put something together. And I was looking at her, and behind her head was one of my pieces and one of hers, where the colorations just matched perfectly. And I realized that, she was drawing these figurative pieces that were, you know, abstracted, expressionistic, but you could definitely still tell what they were. And I was doing these very exact illustrations but put into an abstract setting. And so they were sort of opposites in that way, but yet they matched together so well. And we thought, well, it was a Brady Bunch moment. Hey kids, let's put on a show. And so we put together this traveling exhibition, Femme and Fauna. And we're lucky enough to be accepted by the Pump House and all the really great people there. So, Jo-Ann, is there anything you want to add to that? And talk about your
I
work, of
think you
course.
nailed it.
Jo, would you mind giving us a little bit of your background in arts?
Sure. Ingrid may have come from North Dakota, but I'm from Iowa originally, and I went to the University of Iowa. They have a remarkable art department there. And I had the advantage of being able to be in the printmaking department, the photography department, and the drawing department with outstanding internationally known artists. So I stayed with 2D with those three mediums, and eventually kept drawing and drawing and drawing, because you can draw anywhere, even if you don't have a black and white studio or a black and white photography developing area. And I just kept going. Wherever I went, I found other artists, even when I moved to small areas in Iowa and then eventually on to other places, we always found an artist to work with. When I got to Minneapolis and I met Ingrid, and I met a lot of other artists through Art World, and this was a good place to be. So that's basically it. Let's keep going.
All right, wonderful. All right, well, we're going to start with Ingrid's work. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of a background of your inspiration, your process, and the materials you use.
Sure, sure, I'd be happy to. As I mentioned before, my degree is in both printmaking and fiber arts, and I had been doing those two things separately. But there was a time when I was printing, shredding those prints up and weaving them back together because I am a weaver as well. And I was just losing too much of the image. So I started using handmade papers because being a fiber artist, of course, I love paper. And I found these two kinds of paper, both mulberry papers, that worked really well with the printmaking and took the ink very well. They're also real sturdy. So I started using sewing as a way of adhering them together, as a way of collage. And those sewing stitches became part of the imagery, part of the collage, part of the composition as a whole. So the piece that you see here, Overboard, has this etching of bees, which is one of my faves, and has a running stitch going across the top. Those are the little markings that you see. That's all the stitches are hand done on my artwork. I do sew by machine. In fact, there's a little machine behind me and boxes full of thread. But all of my artwork is done by hand with embroidery floss. So I'm using handmade papers. I do not make the paper because this stuff is so good and it's perfect for what I need. Um, so a lot of the stitches and the fields of stitches are sort of drawn from memory in that, as Jo-Ann mentioned, I did grow up in North Dakota, and a lot of sort of flat land and fields in the wintertime just look like this constant lines of running stitches, things like this. But during the pandemic, I started doing a series of flags. Um, Not literal flags, but compositions patterned after nautical flags. And this is one of the pieces from that body of work where Overboard speaks to this composition of flag. Stands for Man Overboard. It was a whole idea around communicating long distance um, post pandemic. But also it has to do with the animals that are portrayed in the etchings. And oftentimes these flags, like the composition of the stitching and non-stitched areas sort of emulates one pattern, whereas the paper colorations emulate another pattern. And then of course the illustration of the bees being sort of overboard or off land, that kind of idea sort of ties it all together. And you'll find that in all of the pieces that come from that flag series. There's more than the flag series in the show. But I chose these three from that series just to have sort of one sort of vein of inspiration to talk about.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear the inspiration and the stories behind each of these pieces. So thank you for that. As we move into this next piece, one of my specific questions for you is what style of printmaking do you do for these specific pieces?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I actually do dry point printing, which means that there's no acid etching involved. It's an intaglio print and not a relief print. A lot of people know printmaking by stamps, things like that, which is a relief print where if something is carved out, you rub the ink over the raised pieces. Intaglio is the opposite. You carve into something and the ink goes into the little divots that have been carved. Sorry, I'm tucking with my hands down here. Dry point etchings are done where you scrape directly into the surface, not using any sort of acids or any other way. And I'm actually doing dry point on plastics, on plexiglass. So I started using to get a real fine line. I started using dental tools to do this, which, if you can imagine scratching into plastic, it's sort of, So I started doing animals and fish specifically to train my hand to do a fluid line and a variegated line. And animals being such organic shapes and being able to be so expressive in that way, I just kept going. It's still something that I'm thrilled to do.
Yeah, these prints are so intricate. As you were saying, many people, I think, when they first see them, think they're drawings. And it's so interesting to hear you, talk about your process of using dental tools in order to get all those small, intricate, organic lines with printmaking. So wonderful. Is there anything else you would like to say about this piece before we move on?
Well, this piece was inspired by a lot of things that sort of happened in the years after 2020. Keep Clear of Me is sort of a reference to the original flag inspiration where it's a don't come near me. We've got dangerous stuff on board, things like that. Yeah. And also a lot of sort of I hate to say it, but there's a lot of political stuff in here as well. It sort of emulates the colors of the Mexican flag and the wall, being, with America versus and this wall of stitching blocking things out. So there's a lot in this one.
Mhm. Also, when I first saw the piece, I mean, obviously we're seeing a bison here, and there's also just if you've ever been out west, keeping your space and your distance from these giant animals. So it's just great to hear all of the layers of information put into each
Right.
of these pieces. So, okay, let's move on to the next piece, Dangerous Cargo.
Yeah. So this, of course, is a reference to I've got dangerous stuff on board, so be warned, that kind of thing. But also what these dots are, a lot of people were asking me about these at the opening, and people ask about these in my studio all the time. They're all French knots, which is an embroidery stitch that's very three-dimensional. It's actually really hard to photograph these without it looking funky because they are three-dimensional off of the surface. This sort of way I've been doing the French knots is, looking almost like a seascape or something like that. Really, really was one of the things that ties this together as a nautical themed item. And the print, of course, the beauty of printmaking is that you can make many. The additions of these are already done. The plates are sort of exhausted. So when I print on the handmade papers, there is sort of a placing of the ink, so each image comes out differently, but this is all the same print 3 times of octopus tentacles, which of course, speaks to the sea and that kind of thing, but it's also sort of what's going on under there. Is there danger? That kind of thing. So, but French knots are something I really love.
Mhm. Could you give us a little insight into your process with the embroidery of and French knots? There is such a perfect amount of space between each individual knot and sew stitch. How are you able to get them so perfectly straight across all of your pieces?
That is a great question, and you might notice, they're not perfectly perfect. They are all hand done. The big secret is graph paper. So when I'm laying out the composition and with all the papers, with the prints, I sort of I use vellum graph paper to see through and draw on there what I would like the composition to be. And then I go through and pre-poke all the holes by hand because as you're sewing on paper, the paper sort of sticks up and down as you're sewing through, and I don't like that. So I want all the paper to be poked through at first, and then I have a guide for when I go back and stitch by hand. And each one of these knots is sort of an individual character. They're not quite a knot per se. It's more of an intentional tangle. And anyone who embroiders will know what I mean.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for giving insight into your process and your inspirations. I highly recommend everyone come and see these works in person. Uh, these are framed so that the paper is floating, and so you are really able to see the natural curve of some of these papers. And it's a really wonderful effect. So let's move into Jo Hendricks' work. This is one of the pieces in her show. Jo, would you mind talking a little bit about your process and inspiration and how you're able to create such fluid forms?
Sure. Okay, this is Blue Liz with silver eyes. You can barely see her silver eyes, but when I am drawing, I used to draw when I first started with shading and all those things they used to tell us to do. And eventually, eventually I moved on. You can do. I've been drawing for like too many, not enough years. So now when I go to drawing co-op every Sunday at Florence Hills Drawing Co-op in Northeast Minneapolis, I see the model and I draw with lines. And I usually the lines are flowing, the lines I are connected. I don't like lines left sitting there with no connection. So, but I also want to taking inspiration from the model. I want to make an interesting composition. I don't want to bore myself. And I'm going to do that by selecting details and manipulating the proportions of the body. I want the figure to fill the page, and I want to make the figure identifiable, but also because none of our bodies are perfect. I want to say that this is a body and it's very graphic, but all of my figures are very very set firmly in the paper. They command the paper, they command the composition. Um, each one of them has a force. So this one is actually a good composition because of the darker blue lines on either side. They push and hold up that figure on the paper. Um, and I try and keep them, when I keep the colors minimally on this one, it works very well. Any questions,
Yes. So
Olivia?
is every single one of your figures drawn from life?
Yes, and
Okay.
her name really is Liz. This was Liz, and they're not supposed to be portraits of a person that you can recognize, but rather they're a portrait of a person. So, yep, every one of them is drawn from life. And I usually put the name um, on the drawing so you can tell I know who it is. That was my inspiration.
All right. Wonderful. Well, let's move in to the next piece. Um, Are there anything you would like to say specifically about this piece? I personally love the proportions in this one. Your colors are
Good,
so playful and joyous. I would say everyone who comes and
yeah,
sees the exhibition leaves with that understanding of just
good.
the joy being just
That
coming
that
off
makes
these pieces.
good. That's what I want to hear. And once again, we'll start with the background. Those dark purple things contain the figure on the page, and they're essential for the composition. This is Liz again, and I took her pose sitting on a stool, and all of these started as black and white drawings. And I select out of all of them, let's say I have 30 drawings from Drawing Co-op. There might be one that I'm going to keep and use it as a painted drawing. So I don't want people to think that you don't edit. You edit a lot with drawings. I have a burn pile, and the ones that aren't receiving and I never want to see again go in the burn pile. But let's get back to Liz. I think she's like a giantess. She's like she could be a queen somewhere with her force. But people also like that I've given her like an animal spotting on her legs and arms. So she's human and yet also part animal. What else can I say about her? I think she fills the page really well.
Mhm.
Any other questions, Olivia?
Yes. So when you do these drawings, I mean, you can tell by looking at them that the lines are very light and fluid. How do you decide what colors to use and fill in each of your drawings with?
I do whatever I think is right. I think about it for about 30 seconds and then I start painting.
Okay. Wonderful. Let's move into this next piece, Blue Dana. This is personally one of my favorites. I
Oh,
love just the face and the different colors in the background, and I love just the over draping limbs, and it's just kind of just this whole area of color, but it's just really wonderful. Is there anything specific you would like to say about this piece?
well, when I look at this, I also think of Ingrid's work because she also is very, she has, with her stitchings also make a form. So, and my drawings also have forms in them. Form is very important. And the form of the blue holds the body into that composition, the dark blue, and yet on the green pushes it in. So it's all, she's all very contained, but then you really have to look inside that light blue body to see what's
Mm,
going on with it. So it
mhm.
makes you, the dark color, the bright colors draw you in, but the faint lines. And a friend of mine just said to me, "Jo-Ann, your lines are very lyrical." So I thought, that's a good word. I'm going to put that somewhere. Um, so that's it. You know, there's always a volume to the figures in my work. I want them to, I want people to know that there's substance to these figures of women.
Definitely. And just another question for you in general, have you always tended to focus on the human form in your work? Or are there any other areas of inspiration that you work in?
If I've done anything not figurative, it's a very small portion of my drawings. The figures and the human interactions have always been what drew me most.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for both of you for joining me. Is there anything else you would like to add or that people should keep in mind when viewing your work in person?
Ingrid, what do you think?
Enjoy it. See in it what you see. As Joanne said, her figures are meant to sort of portray the exaggerated beauty of things. And yeah, it's one of the things I enjoy most about her work and seeing her work next to mine and enjoy it.
I,
Wonderful.
Olivia, I've had people say to me they relax when they see these figures because I don't know if they're coming in thinking they'll see something that's sexualized or romanticized, and then they see these figures that have, are non-perfect representations of women, and I see viewers just relax, and then and because I use color, you don't have to think of them as real people. You
Mhm.
can, they're human figures, but you can jump into that color, and then you can just start looking.
Yes, as people have said, they're joyous and bright, and the push and pull of your abstraction and the, reference to real animals in Ingrid's work, it's just so engaging to move throughout the exhibit. These pieces, if you come and see them in person, are displayed all together, intermixed, and they've done a really great job of creating a cohesive exhibit. And so I highly recommend everyone come and see this exhibition in person. It will be on display in our Cotter Gallery through April 13th, 2024. So thank you so much again for joining us today and enjoy.
Thank you,
And thanks.
Olivia.
Thank you, Olivia. And thanks to the Pump House too. The staff is amazing there and it's a
I
great space.
know.
Enjoy.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much.
Oh,
It's just been wonderful to have your show here, and people have been so engaged with it. Like I was telling Joe earlier, and I had emailed Ingrid about it. We had a group come in a few weeks ago who work with adults with Alzheimer's and getting them creative again in the community. And they came and looked at your work and created, they had some little stamps and created some little stampings of like animals and things and did some drawings. And it was really wonderful. People have really enjoyed the show. So we appreciate you bringing it to us.
Sure.
Yay.
Yes. All
Yes.
right.
Anything you need
That
from us, just
that's
let us
very
know.
meaningful.
Yeah.
Of course. All right.